This is TLV1.
This season of the Tel Aviv Review is made possible by the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern, and every week I'll be engaging in close encounters of the intellectual kind with writers and scholars, or simply people of ideas of all types and vocations who have done something to make our lives a tad more interesting. My guest today is a lecturer at the Middle Eastern History Department at the University of Haifa. He is the author of a new book titled Legal Pluralism in the Holy City, Competing Courts, Forum Shopping and Institutional Dynamics in Jerusalem, that was recently published in English by Ashgate. The book provides an organizational ethnography of Sharia courts in West Jerusalem, that is, religious Muslim courts that are part of the Israeli legal system and are an important case study in the attempt to paint an intricate picture of how different populations, religions, cultures and legal traditions come together in the Holy City. Dr. Ido Shahar, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So why don't we start by talking about the place of Sharia courts in Israel? What is their jurisdiction, who they are run by, and who for?
Well, I guess most people know that in Israel we don't have territorial family law. We don't have universal civil family law that applies to all citizens of all denominations, of all sects in Israel. And instead, we have a sort of amulet-like system, or I would call it a personal status regime, a situation in which every sect, every religious group gets its own courts, its own religious courts, and these courts have jurisdiction in matter of personal status of religious group members.
So what kind of cases are brought before them?
Mostly family issues like divorce, like marriage, like maintenance, like custody of children, and so on.
Mm-hmm. So Sharia court is basically the Muslim equivalent of what Jews know as rabbinical courts.
That is correct, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
These are all, and some other courts, of course, like Druze courts, like there are several Christian courts, ecclesiastical courts.
Mm-hmm.
Altogether, there are about 17 different religious courts in Israel, each of them with jurisdictions only on the group members.
Mm-hmm. Yet there are also, in parallel, civilian family courts in this country. How do they not clash, or do they?
Well, they may clash, actually. But the thing is that in matters of marriage and divorce, only the religious courts has jurisdictions. In every other matter, like, for example, maintenance or custody or inheritance and so on, they have parallel jurisdiction, which means that people, litigants, may choose where to apply. And this is a well-known phenomenon in the field of rabbinical courts and the civil courts. There is a race of jurisdiction, so to speak. The first party of a dispute that applies a certain forum, a certain court, gets an advantage because this forum will deal with the dispute. So this is the race of jurisdiction between husbands and wife, for example, in the case of rabbinical and civil courts.
Because there are some that are more lenient towards men and others that are...
That's the assumption. It doesn't always work in this manner, but that's the assumption. But usually the civil courts are more lenient, are more prone to maintain women's rights, are more prone to, I'd call it, gender equal relations. So usually we tend to find that women are hoping or aiming to apply to a civil court, and husbands or men are trying to apply to the religious court. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily work in effect in this manner.
So for you as an anthropologist, what was the main interest in studying Sharia courts?
Well, I have a long history of studying Sharia court. I actually started in studying the Sharia court in Beersheba. which deals mostly with Bedouins. This is the Muslim Arab population in the Negev are Bedouins. So the Sharia court is very unique because it deals with a society or a group of people that have some unique characteristics. I moved to Jerusalem and then started attending the Sharia court in Jerusalem.
It's all in Arabic, by the way?
It's in Arabic, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sorry, go on.
I was sitting there as an anthropologist, observing the deliberations, sitting at the secretariat of the court, at the waiting room, conversing with litigants, conversing with Sharia advocates or with lawyers, and of course with the court staff or personnel. And I was, at first, the thing is, my research developed and grew out of my participant observations in that court. I was interested at the beginning because I combined an anthropological perspective with a Middle Eastern history perspective. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if you know, but Sharia courts records, Sijil, it is called Sijilat in Arabic. This is the most important source for writing history of Muslim societies, not only in the Middle East, all over the world. This is one of the few sources that provide us with some rich information about societies, about past Muslim societies,
about family life and about civilian life. This kind of
exactly. It's not only information about elites, about the intellectual elite, about the
so-called micro history.
Exactly, not necessarily micro. It may be a macro history. It may be social history, economic history, geographical history, all kind of histories.
Grassroots.
That's the point. We are lacking sources about grassroots history of the Middle East, and Sharia courts records is in the last 4 decades or so. It's the main source. And I was interested in observing how it is produced. That was my main...
History in the making.
Exactly. Without presuming, that it is the same in the 15th century and in the 20th century.
But it's an interesting window into the Muslim society.
So that was my research proposal, for PhD, to study the court records production, how it is produced and what are the conventions, the literary conventions, the bureaucratic conventions, and so on and so forth. I then discovered that, in theory, that was a good topic. In effect, I was bored by it. I was bored by it, and I couldn't really make it rich enough, the description of these processes of record production. And then I came to realize that in Jerusalem there is this very unique situation in which there are more than one Sharia court operating in the city. Because actually, since after the Israeli occupation and annexation of East Jerusalem, there used to be, and there still is, a Jordanian court that operates...
according to Jordanian law.
According to Jordanian law, the Qadis are nominated by the king or by the Ministry of Waqf issues, and they still operate on the Temple Mount.
Right.
It's a very prestigious court, very old. Actually, it has one of the oldest archives. There are more than a few Israeli historians and other historians that made a very nice career based on the records of this court's archive.
Wait, but if the Jordanian court system is still operating in Jerusalem almost half a century after its annexation by Israel, why did Israel agree to give Jordan a legal foothold in a place where, in effect, Israeli law was enacted?
It's a very good question. Of course, they didn't do... They obviously cancelled or didn't allow civil Jordanian courts or other types of courts to continue functioning in Jerusalem. But they had a problem with the Sharia court because it was a prestigious court, as I said, because they were afraid. Israeli policymakers. They were afraid that closing it, stopping it from operating would be conceived as another assault on Islam in
But it
Jerusalem.
poses a problem not only because of foreign interference in what would be internal Israeli affairs, but at the same time, and even before 1967, there were Muslim Sharia courts in West Jerusalem because was...
There wasn't. There were very few Muslims in Jerusalem before the 1967 war. There was a Sharia court in Jaffa. And after this 1967 war, Israel obliged Muslim residents of East Jerusalem, which were not, by the way, they did not get a status of Israeli citizens. They are permanent residents.
Yeah.
They're not citizens, although they have the blue ID card, not the orange one of the the West Bank.
They live in limbo.
But exactly. Yeah. But so there was no Israeli Sharia court in West Jerusalem until 1988. And it was kind of...
who was it for then, if there weren't any Muslims in West Jerusalem?
There was the Jordanian court that kept working on the Temple Mount. It was run by the Jordanian Waqf and acted the Jordanian law. And it kept working, and Israeli policy towards it was kind of, let's say, it fluctuated between, sometimes they tried to co-opt it. For example, they were willing to keep it working under the aegis of Jordanian law, so long as it is incorporated within the Israeli legal system. But the Waqf functionaries and the Qadis and the other personnel at the Sharia courts, they were not willing for any type of cooperation with Israeli authorities because that would mean that they accept and that they legitimize Israeli control.
Right.
In
okay, so in 1988 there was a Sharia court established in West Jerusalem. So who was it for then? What was the rationale behind it?
Let me just say that the Israeli policy was in a way incoherent. Sometimes they tried to co-opt it. Sometimes, they used a carrot and a stick. The carrot was we're willing to accept you, we're willing to...
Some would say divide and rule.
Exactly, in a way.
Okay.
On the other hand, sometime in the early 1970s, they decided that the rulings of these Jordanian Sharia courts will not be implemented and will not be accepted by Israeli authorities. Which means, for example, imagine you're a Muslim woman and you have, a matrimonial dispute with your husband, and you're seeking a maintenance order. And you get that maintenance order from the Jordanian Sharia courts, and then you go to the Bituach Leumi, the National Insurance Institute, and they tell you, we are sorry, this is unacceptable. We can't do anything with it. So East Jerusalemite Muslims were obliged to go down to Jaffa, where they had...
well, they weren't obliged. It was a safer bet, right? I mean,
it was
wiser on their behalf to appeal the Israeli authorities rather than the Jordanian ones and hope that it would be recognized by Israel.
Yes. Control is by all means in the hands of Israel.
So didn't this completely undermine the Waqf courts in East Jerusalem?
It did. It was... so when in 1988, after they were apparently desperate of the attempts to co-opt or to incorporate the Jordanian court within the Israeli legal system, so they decided to establish a new Israeli court in West Jerusalem. And of course, that undermined the importance, the position.
So this is basically what you call in your book Legal Pluralism and Forum Shopping, the fact that you have an array of different instances whose jurisdiction sometimes clashes, and the applicant can just choose one that would perhaps or hypothetically better further their goals.
Right. Best serves their interest. This is the phenomenon of forum shopping. This is how it is defined. Yes, and this is what happened. Since 1988, there is an Israeli Sharia court operating in West Jerusalem. There is a Jordanian court operating on Temple Mount in East Jerusalem. And since 1995, there are also Palestinian courts operating in the neighborhoods that fall outside of the Israeli-defined municipal borders of Jerusalem.
That are municipally part of Jerusalem, but in fact...
Exactly. They're part of the urban space of Jerusalem, but they fall outside, like Aram, like Ezaim.
So they are under the jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority.
Right. This is Area B in the Oslo Accord.
Right. But say someone who lives in one of those villages near Jerusalem, that is part of the urban conglomerate, but still they are not even Israeli permanent residents. They were just, say, Palestinian citizens. Can they seek any kind of assistance in Sharia courts in Israel, the Jordanian ones or the Israeli ones?
It's a good question. There is a difference between the formal issue of, there is this geographical jurisdiction. You're not supposed, if you're an Israeli court operating in West Jerusalem, you're not supposed to deal with cases of litigants who are not Israeli citizens or permanent residents. Yeah. But it's up to you. It's up to you. And this is actually one of my arguments.
The presiding judge can actually say, even though in West Jerusalem, even though this person is not an Israeli citizen, they can still... Yeah,
and also it's a very... dividing lines are blurred.
Right.
Because people move and you may still have an Israeli ID card, but then you are living in Ramallah, for example. So are you entitled or not entitled to apply to the Sharia court in Jerusalem? This is it's a question of interpretation and of the actual policies.
It sounds terribly Kafkaesque, doesn't it?
Well,
I don't know. We're talking about it theoretically now, but oh my God, just having to deal with this impossible entanglement of possibilities.
Well, that's Jerusalem,
still,
impossible entanglement. That's Jerusalem.
Exactly. It's just a mirror image of the city, isn't it? But another interesting element that I found in your book, that is probably because you are, as you said, an anthropologist, is the fact that it's some sort, even in West Jerusalem, a Palestinian enclave within a very Israeli, both in theory and practice, a very Israeli framework.
Absolutely. This is an Israeli court, an official Israeli court. The Qadis are being nominated by the Israeli president. The Knesset, the Israeli legislator, controls the laws apply, both procedural law, both and substantive law. And yet, I agree. This is, I would say, or it has become over the years, a space for Palestinian action, for Palestinian agency. It is not a simple mechanism of control and cooptation. This is my argument.
How do you mean?
Well, because it is run by the way, the Qadi and the senior staff members of the court are all what they call from the Arab of 48, which means they are from
Israeli Arab,
from Jaffa or from the north, from the Galilee or Haifa or wherever. They are citizens, and they are serving a population of Muslim Palestinians who are not citizens of Israel. They are permanent residents.
So even internal Palestinian divisions come to the fore in these.
I would say internal Palestinian cohesion in a way, because this is one of the functions of this court. It brings together different types of people and groups and creates in a way a Palestinian position, a Palestinian consciousness, a Palestinian solidarity between Israeli Palestinians and East Jerusalemites and perhaps West Bankers as well.
Would you say that it's really a theater of Israeli multiculturalism at a very small scale?
In a way, I would say it is a hybrid organization or a hybrid institution that combines different kind of legal cultures, different kind of organizational cultures, different ethoses. It is part and parcel of the Israeli legal system. On the other hand, it is a Muslim and a Palestinian arena of action. And because, the state doesn't really care about it. It deals with family matters. It's not a security issue. It's not well supervised.
Right.
In comparison to other institutions, I would say, in the broad socio-political space.
Right.
So this lack of attention, in a way, gives the Qadis and the personnel and the people attending this court sort of wide or broad levels of freedom to act.
And the fact that it's really separated from conventional politics probably serves their interests even further. I'm afraid this is all we have time for, Dr. Ido Shahar. But, this is so intricate. We could have spent at least another hour unpacking this picture, but I'm afraid we'll have to do it another time. You're a Middle Eastern history professor at the University of Haifa and author of the newly published Legal Pluralism in the Holy City, Competing Courts, Forum Shopping, and Institutional Dynamics in Jerusalem. Thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you. Thank you.
That brings us to the end of our show today. Thank you very much for listening. Also, big thanks to Alex Benish, the technical producer of this show. I'm Gilad Halpern, signing off here in Tel Aviv. Do join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.
בין ערפילי זיתים